He walked onto my field angry, stubborn, impossible, and somehow became the only reason our team survived, and the only person who could break my heart. I always thought grief would feel slow and heavy like moving through mud. But when my father died, the world didn't slow down at all. It spun faster and faster, and I felt like I was holding on by my fingertips. People kept telling me to take time off, to breathe, to process, to rest, but they didn't understand that I didn't even know how to do any of those things. I didn't cry at the funeral. I didn't scream. I just stood there staring at the stadium lights outside the old church windows because he always said lights like that could fix anything, even a bad season. He left me 3 things in his will: his watch, his old Cubs cap, and the last thing which felt more like a dare than an inheritance: the Chicago Blue Comets. His failing minor league baseball team sitting at the very bottom of the league, drowning in debt with players who were loyal but exhausted, and fans who showed up more out of habit than hope. I remember blinking at the lawyer and saying something brilliant like, "Excuse me, what in the actual world am I supposed to do with a baseball team? Because I worked in marketing, not miracles." The next day, I walked into the front office clutching his dusty cap, and I swear the building sighed at me like it knew I had no idea what I was doing. The paint was chipped, the lights flickered, the hallways smelled faintly of popcorn and heartbreak. My dad used to say the Blue Comets had character, but honestly, I think he meant rot. I stood in his old office staring at the framed photos on his wall, the championships from decades ago, the players who still called him coach even after they retired, the fans who believed in him even when the team was losing by double digits. That was when I realized I couldn't just sell the team. It was all he had loved, and somehow, in this bizarre twist of fate, it was the last piece of him I could still take care of. So I decided I would try. Maybe I would fail spectacularly. Maybe I would trip over my own incompetence. Maybe the entire minor league would laugh at me, but I wasn't letting go. Not yet. The first problem was obvious. We needed a coach. A real one. Not the poor interim guy who already looked like he was planning his escape. I spent hours searching through names, resumes, old articles, and scouting notes until one name stood out like a lit match in a dark room. Logan Reyes, former superstar. The man who once carried an entire franchise on his back until the injury that ended his career overnight. Every article about him said the same thing: he was brilliant, intense, stubborn, and allergic to coming out of retirement. Naturally, I called him anyway. And that was the moment everything started to change, even though I had no idea just how much he would change me too. If you suddenly inherited something huge that you weren't prepared for, would you take the risk and try to save it or walk away? I didn't expect Logan Reyes to answer the phone honestly. I thought it would go straight to voicemail, or maybe he'd block the world entirely. But when he picked up the call, there was this low, rough hello that made my brain forget all the professional words I had rehearsed. I managed to introduce myself, explain that I had inherited the Blue Comets and was looking for a head coach, and before I could even finish my sentence, he said, "No, just no." Not even a polite version. A solid door slamming? No, with a sigh underneath it, like he couldn't believe people were still calling him about baseball. I probably should have thanked him and hung up, but something inside me snapped. Maybe anger. Maybe just the grief that hadn't found a way out yet. So I said, "You haven't even heard the offer." He said, "I don't need to." I said, "Fine, then I'll come. Say it in person." There was a pause long enough that I wondered if he had hung up, but then he muttered something like, "Don't waste your time," and ended the call anyway. Which of course meant I immediately got in my car, because the fastest way to make me do something is to tell me not to. He lived in a quiet neighborhood on the edge of the city where leaves gather on porches and nobody wants to bother anybody else. When he opened the door, he looked nothing like the clean-cut golden boy I remembered from his playing days. He looked broader, rougher, tired, like he'd been running from the past for years and the past had finally caught up. His hair was longer, his jaw was scruffy, his shoulders still looked powerful, but his eyes were the thing that really got me: deep, wary eyes that kept scanning me like I was a problem he wasn't ready to solve. I told him who I was again. He nodded but didn't invite me inside. So I stood on his porch and laid out everything I could think of. The team was dying. The players needed direction. My dad had believed in them. I believed in them too, even if I wasn't sure why. And the final thing I blurted out, which surprised both of us: "You're the only one who can do this." He leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, expression unreadable. He said, "You don't know anything about coaching." I said, "No, but I know about people. And despite everything he said, I don't think you're done with baseball." That line made something flicker in his eyes. A flash of pain, maybe anger, maybe something softer buried so deep he didn't want me to see it. He shook his head and said the Comets need a miracle. I said, "Then be one." He actually laughed at that, a low, disbelieving laugh, and for a moment I saw the man he used to be. Then he said, "Fine, I'll come meet the team once. One practice. That's it." Which was more than I expected, and more than he knew he was agreeing to. Do you think first impressions are accurate, or do most people hide who they really are at the beginning? The next morning, I kept telling myself not to get my hopes up, because men like Logan do not show up for people like me, and they definitely don't show up for dying teams like the Blue Comets. But I still found myself pacing the edge of the field 30 minutes early, clutching a clipboard like it was a life raft. The stadium looked tired under the sunlight, the bleachers empty, the grass uneven, the scoreboard stuck on a number that wasn't even from our last game. It felt like a metaphor for my entire life. At that moment, messy, behind schedule, barely hanging on. The players trickled in, yawning, dragging their gear, some giving me polite nods, others giving me looks that clearly said, "Are we seriously doing this?" I couldn't blame them. They had survived too many false promises, too many temporary coaches, too many losing seasons. Their hope was thin, almost transparent. I kept checking the parking lot every few minutes, trying to pretend I wasn't. And then a black pickup truck rolled in and he stepped out. The field seemed to straighten itself when he walked toward us. Logan wasn't dressed like a coach. He wore a plain tee and worn-out jeans. But somehow he still looked like someone who belonged under stadium lights. The players recognized him instantly. You could practically hear the shock spread down the dugout. Some whispered his name, others just stared. Even the ones who pretended not to care cared a little. He didn't greet me. He didn't greet them. He just dropped his bag on the ground and said, "All right, let's see what we've got." The players scrambled like someone had flipped a switch. He started warm-ups, quickly barking instructions with this rough, sharp tone that somehow didn't feel cruel, just direct. He watched their throws, corrected their stances, adjusted their grips, and every time he corrected someone, he gave them one extra second of his attention, like he wanted them to know he actually saw them. They responded instantly. Men who'd been dragging their feet minutes earlier were sprinting like they wanted to impress him. I stood at the edge of the field, trying not to stare too obviously, but it was impossible not to notice how different he was from every coach we'd had. He didn't waste time on speeches or ego. He focused on what mattered. Maybe that's why watching him stirred something. I didn't expect a weird mix of relief, admiration, and something warm I refused to name yet. Halfway through practice, he finally walked over to me. I realized my heart was pounding way harder than running laps could explain. He said, "Your team isn't hopeless, but they're undisciplined." I said, "That's fixable, right?" He shrugged like maybe. Then he added quietly, "They need someone who believes they can win." I asked if he believed they could. He looked at the field for a long moment before saying, "I don't know, but I think they want to." Then he said he would come back for 1 week. 1 week only. I nodded calmly, pretending that wasn't the best news I'd gotten since inheriting this mess. Would you keep fighting for a dream everyone else has already given up on? The next few days felt different, like something had shifted under the surface, even though no one wanted to say it out loud. Logan showed up early every morning, which shocked the players because half of them still dragged themselves in with sleepy eyes and tangled hair. He walked the field like it belonged to him. Not in an arrogant way, but in a, "this place deserves better" way. Maybe that was why I started showing up even earlier than he did, because I wanted the field to look as ready as he always seemed. He barely talked to me at first. Just nods, short answers, a few quick updates delivered like we were business partners instead of two stubborn people forced into the same mess. But every time he spoke to me, I felt this strange pull, like something in him was always holding back, just enough to make me want to step closer and figure him out. One afternoon during practice, a storm rolled in out of nowhere, thick gray clouds spilling over the stadium like smoke. I was standing near the dugout when the first cold drop hit my cheek. I turned toward the field, ready to call everyone in, but Logan beat me to it, his voice cutting through the rising wind. "All right, hustling in, let's go now." The player sprinted, but he stayed behind, grabbing equipment, tossing it toward me with this smooth efficiency that made everything look easier than it was. Lightning cracked in the distance, and the sky opened up, soaking him instantly. I yelled at him to hurry, but he just shook his head and kept gathering gear like adrenaline didn't exist in his vocabulary. When he finally ran toward me, he was drenched shirt, clinging to him, hair dripping across his forehead, eyes dark but sharp. I swear the air shifted around us. We ducked into the dugout breathless from the sudden downpour, and for a second we just stood there inches apart, listening to the rain hammer against the metal roof. He pushed his hair back and laughed quietly, not the mocking kind. A real honest laugh, like the storm had broken something heavy inside him. I felt the sound more than I heard it. Deep, warm, unsettling in a way I didn't want to examine too closely. He said storms in Chicago always hit fast. I said so do retired baseball legends, apparently. He rolled his eyes, but I saw the faint smile before he hit it. Then his gaze softened, not fully gentle, just less guarded, and he said, "You don't hide from the work, do you?" I shrugged, trying to act unaffected even while my pulse was doing ridiculous things. I told him my dad never hid, so I won't either. Something in that answer hit him. I could see it. His shoulders dropped a little, like he understood something he hadn't before, maybe about me, maybe about why I was fighting so hard to save a team everyone else dismissed. The rain kept falling, and for a moment I forgot we were surrounded by broken bleachers and cracked concrete. It felt like we were the only two people left in the world. That was the first moment I admitted silently that I was in trouble. Have you ever misjudged someone only to realize they had a softer side you didn't expect? By the end of the week, the team looked sharper, more alive, more focused than they had in months, and every player knew exactly who to thank, even if Logan refused to accept any credit. He always shrugged it off, said they were the ones doing the hard work, said he was just pointing them in the right direction, but the truth was obvious. They listened to him. They respected him. He pushed them, and they didn't push back because they trusted him in a way they hadn't trusted anyone since my father. And somewhere in the middle of all that progress, something between us started to shift too. Nothing dramatic, nothing anyone else would notice, but small things, small moments, small glances that lingered just a little too long. I kept telling myself I was imagining it, that I was reading into things because I was lonely, or stressed, or still grieving, but deep down I knew I wasn't imagining anything. There was something there, even if neither of us was brave enough to look straight at it yet. One afternoon after practice, I found Logan in my dad's old office, sitting in the beat-up leather chair scrolling through scouting reports with a pen tucked behind his ear. It startled me because no one sat in that chair except my father, not even me. But he looked so natural there, like he belonged somehow, like the room had been waiting for him. He didn't notice me at first, so I just stood quietly watching him, watching the way his brow furrowed when he focused, watching the way his fingers drummed lightly on the desk, watching the way he filled the silence so easily without even speaking. When he finally glanced up, he blinked like he hadn't expected to see me. I said didn't mean to interrupt. He said you didn't. His voice was softer than usual, and for a moment neither of us looked away. I asked how the reports looked. He leaned back, stretching a little, and said, "Your dad had good instincts." I smiled and said, "He always trusted his gut." Logan held my gaze a beat longer than comfortable and said, "Maybe you inherited that." The compliment hit me so unexpectedly I felt my chest warm in this slow, spreading way like sunlight through a window. Then he cleared his throat and pushed the reports toward me, asking if I wanted to go over them together, which sounded innocent but somehow didn't feel innocent at all. We sat side by side, our shoulders almost touching, flipping through stats and notes and old recommendations my father had left scattered across the margins. Every time our arms brushed lightly, my breath stuttered, which was ridiculous because we weren't doing anything remotely romantic, yet the air felt charged like something electric kept stretching between us. At one point, he paused, his finger resting over a familiar handwriting sample, and said, "Your dad was proud of you, you know. I wasn't prepared for that." My throat tightened and my eyes stung, and I whispered, "I hope so." Logan looked at me, really looked at me, and said, "He would be proud of what you're doing now, too." And suddenly, the line between working together and something else entirely felt dangerously thin. Do you think emotional tension between two people always means something deeper is starting to grow? The morning of our first real game under Logan's coaching felt louder, brighter, heavier, like the whole stadium was breathing with us. I woke up way too early, heart buzzing, thoughts racing like I was the one stepping onto the mound instead of sitting in the owner's box trying not to look as terrified as I felt. The team had worked so hard all week, but I still worried because hope is such a delicate thing, and losing this game would crush them harder than they deserved. When I walked into the clubhouse, the energy felt different. There was this hum, this quiet confidence humming under the noise, like everyone believed something good could actually happen. Logan was standing in the center, going over the lineup, his voice steady and calm, the kind of calm that made people listen. When he looked up and saw me, he nodded once, simple but warm and somehow grounding, like he knew I needed reassurance without me saying anything. I leaned against the doorway, watching the guys joke around, tap shoulders, adjust caps, tug gloves tighter. Their laughter felt lighter than it had in months, and seeing that loosened something inside me. Logan finished his talk, and the players headed out toward the tunnel, leaving just the two of us in the suddenly quiet room. He walked over, stopping just close enough that I could feel his presence like a warm pulse. He asked, "You good?" I smiled a little too tightly and said, "Depends on how much winning matters to you." He chuckled low, saying, "Winning always matters, but today isn't about that, not really. Today is about reminding them that they can fight again." That hit me harder than I expected. I nodded and whispered, "Then let's give them that." He placed a gentle hand on my shoulder, quick, brief, barely there, but enough to send a ripple through me. He said, "We will." Then he walked out like he hadn't just turned my whole heartbeat upside down. The game started rough. By the second inning, we were down by 3 runs, and the nerves were crawling under my skin. The crowd murmured restless. The players tensed, the sun too bright on everything. I glanced at Logan standing at the dugout rail, focused, unwavering, unshaken, and something in me steadied too. He signaled the catcher, whispered something quick and sharp. Then suddenly the tide shifted like someone had flipped a hidden switch. By the 5th inning, we tied. By the 7th, we were ahead. And by the 9th, the entire stadium felt like a held breath waiting for the final pitch. When our pitcher struck the last batter out, the crowd erupted. The players exploded off the bench, shouting and hugging and laughing like they'd just been handed back a piece of their souls. I didn't even realize I was smiling until Logan found me, eyes bright with quiet pride. He didn't say anything, just offered that small, rare curve of a grin that felt like a secret between us. And in that moment, I knew something bigger than baseball had just begun. Do you think winning a tough challenge brings people closer together, even if they don't talk about their feelings? After the game, the stadium felt different, almost like the building itself was relieved, like it had been waiting ages to exhale. Fans lingered in the aisles, taking pictures, laughing, calling out congratulations to the guys who walked past glowing with adrenaline. I wandered down toward the field, feeling drawn there like some invisible thread was tugging me along. The grass still shimmered under the lights, and the air carried that warm, dusty scent of victory that I knew my dad would have loved. I spotted Logan near the dugout talking to one of our pitchers, his expression relaxed but focused the way he got when he slipped into mentor mode. When the conversation ended, he turned and saw me walking toward him, and his face softened. Maybe only a little, but enough for me to feel it like a flutter low in my stomach. He asked, "You survived?" I rolled my eyes and said barely, "But if we keep playing like that, I might get used to it." He laughed quietly, and we stood there for a second, just looking at the field, like two people who were trying to understand how one win could make everything feel so different. I told him the team looked good because I didn't know how to say you brought them back to life, Logan. You did that. He shrugged, though, like it was nothing, like he hadn't just changed the whole momentum of the season. He said they did the work. I just redirected a few gears. I don't know what came over me. Maybe it was the glow of the lights or the rush still humming through my chest, but I asked him how it felt. Being back like this, being part of the game again. He went quiet, in that thoughtful, intense way of his, then said, "It felt like remembering something I didn't know I missed." Something in his voice cracked a bit, and I realized this wasn't just coaching for him, this was healing. We walked along the edge of the field, side by side, not touching, but close enough that it made me weirdly aware of how warm the night was, how alive everything felt around us. He asked how it felt for me being in charge of a team I'd never expected to run. I told him the truth, that it felt terrifying and thrilling, and like I was constantly about to fall off a cliff, but somehow I kept finding my footing. He looked at me with this quiet respect that made my heart thump a little too loudly. Then he said something I wasn't prepared for. He said, "Your dad would be proud, you know." My throat tightened instantly because no one had said it like that before, not with that calm certainty. I whispered, "I hope so." He nodded once and said, "I do." For a moment, I wanted to reach for his hand or lean into him or do something reckless just to close the tiny gap between us, but instead, I just breathed and let the moment sit warm and fragile between us, like a spark waiting for the right match. Do you think two people can feel something starting long before either of them says it out loud? The next morning, the whole city seemed to wake up buzzing about the blue comets like someone had flipped a giant switch, and suddenly everyone remembered we existed. My phone wouldn't stop vibrating with notifications, articles, headlines, texts from people I hadn't heard from in years, all saying things like, "Great win last night," and "Looks like you've got something special happening over there." I wanted to feel thrilled, but excitement always comes with pressure, and pressure always finds the softest part of you to press on. I reached the stadium early, expecting the place to be quiet, but the players were already on the field, warming up, joking louder than usual, riding the high from last night. I spotted Logan in the outfield hitting grounders, his stance solid, his focus sharp like he was born with a bat in his hands. Watching him like that made my chest feel warm and heavy in this way that scared me because liking him felt easy and dangerous at the same time. When he noticed me near the rail, he lifted a hand in that understated way of his and walked over, still catching his breath a little. He asked you sleep. I laughed and told him barely. He nodded knowingly because I'm pretty sure he didn't sleep much either. We stood there for a moment and I could feel the morning sun on my shoulders, the crisp air, the soft thud of baseballs hitting gloves. It felt like the beginning of something even if I couldn't name it yet. Inside the office, though, the mood shifted. Two board members were waiting for me, stiff and impatient, and wearing matching expressions that said, "We liked the win, but not you." One of them wasted no time saying that rumors were spreading online that the only reason Logan returned was because of me. I didn't know whether to laugh or panic. They said it like a scandal. Like it was my fault the internet liked to invent things out of thin air. I told them it wasn't true, and even if people wanted to gossip, it had nothing to do with our work. But they kept pushing, saying things like, "Keep your relationship professional, and we can't afford distractions." My stomach twisted because they didn't know anything yet. Somehow their words felt too close to the truth I wasn't ready to admit. When I walked back outside, I must have looked shaken because Logan was instantly alert, eyes narrowing with concern. He asked what happened, his voice low and steady. I shrugged, trying to play it off, but he stepped a little closer, just close enough that I felt surrounded by him without him actually touching me. I said the board is being dramatic. He raised an eyebrow, waiting for more, and I finally sighed and told him the rumor thing. He didn't flinch. In fact, he looked more irritated than embarrassed. He said, "Let them talk. We know why I'm here. You know why I'm here." And suddenly my heart was beating way too fast because his words held this weight, this quiet intensity that felt like a confession hiding under the surface. I looked up at him, and for a breathless second I thought he might say something more, something dangerous, something true, but instead he just gave me that steady look that always left me wanting more and said, "We've got work to do." And maybe that was the moment I realized I'd already fallen. Do you think people feel a connection before they're ready to admit it, even to themselves? The week after the rumors felt strange, like the air around us had thickened just enough to make every glance, every moment, every tiny breath between us feel louder than it should. The team kept improving, which was amazing, but every win, every practice, every strategy meeting made Logan and I orbit closer and closer without either of us saying the thing we were both pretending we didn't feel. One night after a long practice, the guys headed out, leaving the field. Quiet, except for the soft hum of the stadium lights. I stayed behind finishing some notes on roster changes, and when I looked up, I saw Logan, still on the mound alone, turning a baseball in his hands like he was trying to solve a puzzle only he could see. Something in the way he stood there, shoulders tense, jaw tight, made me walk toward him before I even thought about it. He noticed me when I was only a few feet away, and his expression softened the way it always did now when he looked at me. I asked, "You okay?" He didn't answer at first. He just tossed the ball in the air, caught it, and exhaled slowly. Then he said quietly, "Sometimes I forget I'm not a player anymore." It was the first time he'd said something like that without hiding behind a joke or a shrug. I stepped closer until we were standing on the pitching mound together, and it felt strangely intimate being up there, just the two of us surrounded by empty seats and cool night air. I said, "But you're building something here, something that matters." He looked at me like he was weighing those words carefully, then said, "Maybe, but some days it feels like I'm still trying to outrun the version of me that broke." His vulnerability cracked something inside my chest. Without thinking, I reached out and touched his arm lightly, just my fingers tracing the fabric of his sleeve. He didn't pull away. He just breathed a little deeper, like my touch anchored him. I said softly, "You didn't break, Logan. You rebuilt, and that's harder than anything else." He swallowed hard, eyes locked on mine, in this way that made my heart thud against my ribs. For a moment, the world felt painfully still, like the air itself was waiting to see what we'd do next. His voice dropped low when he said, "You make this feel possible. Not the games, the rest of it." My breath caught because that wasn't a random comment, that wasn't a coach talking to an owner. That was a man saying something real, even if he didn't fully understand what it meant yet. We were standing so close, I could feel the warmth of him, the slight rise and fall of his breathing, the almost magnetic pull drawing us together inch by slow inch. I didn't step back, and neither did he. It felt like maybe we were finally going to cross that invisible line between us. Then the stadium lights flicked off with a loud click, plunging everything into darkness except the soft glow from the hallway. We both jumped, slightly breaking the moment, and he let out a quiet, breathy laugh. I laughed too because the timing was ridiculous and perfect and maybe a little protective of us both. He said, "Come on, let's not get locked in." But when he walked beside me, our arms brushed just lightly enough to feel like a promise. Do you think some moments are meant to happen even if the world interrupts them the first time? The night everything finally broke open didn't start dramatic at all. It was supposed to be a simple evening warm-ups, some press notes, then heading home early because the guys had earned a rare light day. But somehow fate or timing, or whatever ridiculous force had been pulling Logan and me together, decided that was the moment it wanted everything to fall into place. I was in my office finishing paperwork when I heard the soft thump of a baseball hitting leather, a steady rhythm like a heartbeat echoing faintly through the hallway. I knew it was him before I even stepped out. He was in the batting cage alone again, swinging slow, controlled, powerful, like he was chasing something he couldn't name. The lights above him glowed warm and golden, casting shadows across his face and chest, making him look both strong and breakable all at once. I leaned on the railing and said, "You know the team's off today, right?" He smirked without turning around and said, "I know, I just needed space to think." I asked about what. He hesitated, and that hesitation told me exactly what he wasn't saying. He set the bat down, walked toward me, slow measured steps that made my pulse race, and stopped close enough that I had to tilt my head up to meet his eyes. He looked tired, but also clear in a way I hadn't seen before, like he'd finally made a decision that had been weighing on him for weeks. He said, "You make this harder than it should be." My stomach dropped, but not in a bad way, more like in that roller coaster way when you're right at the edge of something huge. I whispered, "Why?" He exhaled slow, almost frustrated with himself, then said, "Because every day I tell myself to keep this professional, and every day you make that feel impossible." My breath caught. My whole face warmed, and for a second I couldn't think. I could only feel the truth of his words pulsing in the air between us. I said, Logan, and he shook his head gently, like, no, let me finish. He stepped even closer, our bodies almost touching, but not quite, and said, I came back because I needed purpose again, but I stayed because of you. Because you make me want to fight harder. Because you make this place feel like home in a way I didn't think I'd ever feel again. No one had ever spoken to me like that before, not with that raw honesty, not with that quiet conviction. My heart was beating so fast it felt like the stadium could probably hear it. So I told him my truth too. I said, you make me brave. You make me believe I can do this. You make me feel like I'm not alone. For a moment, we just breathed in the same space, suspended in something warm and fragile and electric. And then, without another word, he reached for me slow, like he was giving me time to stop him, but I didn't. I stepped in, and his hands found my waist, and my hands found his chest, and everything that had been building between us finally snapped into place. The kiss wasn't rushed or wild. It was soft and steady and sure, like we'd both been waiting to breathe for weeks and finally let ourselves inhale. When we pulled apart, he rested his forehead against mine and whispered, guess the rumors were right after all. I laughed softly and said, maybe some things are worth talking about. And under those warm humming lights with his arms still around me, I realized I wasn't just saving my father's team anymore. I was finding something of my own, too. Do you think some connections are inevitable no matter how long two people try to resist them?